Welcome to another episode of Zero Velocity. I'm your host, Brad Thorpe. 1.13 billion people suffer from hypertension. It is the leading cause of heart attacks, strokes, and premature death globally. And it's been that way for pretty much the last 50 years. So I'm here today to talk about it, to offer you an alternative to what has been promoted for those 50 years. The unfortunate situation is such that what we're promoting is failing. And how do we know that? Because it's not getting better. People aren't listening to the advice of the medical practitioners, their doctors, international organizations, such as the World Health Organization, have been trying to combat hypertension, heart disease, stroke for a number of years. It's an economic burden that costs billions of dollars annually. It's actually getting close to trillions of dollars annually. Now, the interesting thing is, when you start to explore what hypertension is, it's an elevation of blood pressure. And for the most of you out there, if you're watching, you've heard that term before. But let's revisit it for a second. So you have your circulatory system, right? What circulates your blood throughout your body. And you have your heart. And for the most part, everyone has one. Not everyone, but most people who are living has one that functions at a level that basically circulates your blood throughout your body. When looking at blood pressure statistics, they traditionally measure your systolic and diastolic values. And what are those numbers? You've heard them before. You've heard 120 over 80. So what are they? Well, that systolic value, that top number, that 120, that's the amount of force exerted against your artery wall when your heart is contracting. So when that sort of goes boom. And then you have the diastolic number, which is that bottom number. And that is the amount of force exerted against your artery wall when your heart is relaxed. So that's when it kind of goes through that filling stage. So you have a filling stage and a pumping stage when you're looking at your blood pressure. So hypertension is the chronic elevation. It is a stage below high blood pressure. And it becomes chronic and it becomes high risk. Now, many people don't recognize that they do have hypertension because they don't monitor it, because they may not necessarily have chest pain. They may not necessarily feel faint or nauseous. But one of the things that I would highly recommend is to check your blood pressure regularly. So that way you don't suddenly die, because that's how prevalent hypertension is to sudden death. And it can strike you as a young athlete. It can strike you as an older, more seniored individual just out maybe shoveling some snow. It becomes prevalent almost daily. It's so prevalent, 1 in 4 males and 1 in 5 females have it. That's either 25 or 20% of the human population has hypertension. Now, it gets kind of interesting when we start to explore hypertension. Now it's just a statistic. It, is so common that it's not even really part of the conversation. And that's sad for the individuals out there that are losing loved ones, or suffering, or dying themselves, or maiming themselves because of it. Right? Maiming. We haven't heard that word in a long time. That sounds bad. Well, it is. It's living a lifetime with an injury, whether it's an injury to your heart or your brain or some of the vessel structures within your body. So today, what we're going to do is explore a different thought process. Now, we've heard the term aerobics for a long time. Since 1968, to be specific. There's a gentleman who has done great things for humanity. His name is Dr. Kenneth Cooper. He has been instrumental in the promotion of cardiovascular conditioning. So much so that his 19 books have sold over 30 million copies. But one thing a lot of people don't recognize is Dr. Kenneth Cooper in 1969 teamed up with a gentleman by the name of William Stubb. William Stubb was a mechanical engineer who invented the commercial treadmill. Now, the reason I bring that up is because the treadmill, walking, running, is so prevalent in the world of fitness that it's commonplace. When talking about jogging in Brazil, they call it Coopering. Why? Named after Dr. Kenneth Cooper. And all he did was took that word aerobic and add an S. He changed the nomenclature of society by adding an S to a pre-existing word. Now, unfortunately, since 1968 and 1969, blood pressure has only gone up. I'm not going to be the one that sits here and tells you that it is because of cardio conditioning. I am going to tell you that cardio conditioning can be a contributing problem to high blood pressure. And we're going to explore that a little bit further later on. Now, the interesting thing, the US Army in 1969, so 1 year after the aerobics craze took off, the same year as the commercial treadmill started to sell. And man, did it sell. It sold like gangbusters. People started to adopt running, walking, inside. The Pacemaster 600 was a global success. Now, in 1969, the US Air Force basically rolled out a new plane. It was the F-16. And what they noticed was their technology started to outperform human function. So the Air Force commissioned a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ronald Wiley to see if he could elevate the blood pressure of fighter pilots. And there had been some research stating that isometrics and isometric exercise elevated blood pressure. Now, what they wanted from their fighter pilots was individuals that were a little bit more pre-hypertensive, individuals that had a higher blood pressure. So they would be more likely to be able to sustain the G-force of flying a plane. 2 of those participants in his first study had hypertension, had higher levels of blood pressure. And what they were doing was high intensity isometric training lasting approximately 10 through 12 minutes, and the test was over a 12-day period. What they noticed on day 2 all the way through day 12 was these 2 individuals that had high blood pressure to start lowered their blood pressure daily. And now I know that goes against what most people think. We have been told traditionally by medical practitioners, exercise professionals, that isometrics is bad for your blood pressure. So if you hear it's bad for your blood pressure and you have some guy in a white coat who's highly educated telling you that blood pressure, or you shouldn't do isometrics if you have blood pressure issues, there's a high probability you're going to listen to him. That doesn't necessarily mean they are up to date with the most up-to-date or current research. They might think to themselves that the new research is incorrect because they don't have enough data on the subject area. It also might not be of interest to them. It might not be of interest to the pharmaceutical industries to resolve blood pressure. I mean, they just randomly say you're now turning 50. You need to prevent high blood pressure, so start taking blood pressure medication. That's a commonality. There's no exit strategy traditionally to getting off your blood pressure medication. That's not even part of the conversation. And that's to current day. That's not even going back to 1968 or 1969. That's current day 2021. Doctors don't have an exit strategy when they provide and prescribe blood pressure medication. So one of the things that I did last night, because the World Health Organization is a leading body on the prevention of hypertension, the promotion of healthy living and health. I mean, they are the World Health Organization. So I did a quick search, and I'm just going to pull up a slide here. And this is pretty cool, or very disturbing, depending on what you want to look about. So I pulled up the World Health Organization's website, and I went to their search bar, and I typed in the word isometrics. As you guys can see there, it came back with no results for isometrics. I was blown away. Here is a type of muscle contraction. Here is a type of exercise. Here's a type of exercise that has an abundance of research on the subject area. So what I did was I thought I maybe made a mistake by adding an S, unlike Dr. Kenneth Cooper. So what I did was I went to and checked another word. I simplified it. I just said isometrics. So we'll pull up the slides, right? Just so you guys know that I'm not making this stuff up. So I added, get rid of the S. And once again, no results for isometrics. So I continue. How about isometric exercise? No results. So I go isometric strength. Surely that could lead to something. Once again, still no results. Now, I get extremely frustrated because here's why. And we're going to make this slide really big. In the US, the rates of hypertension in 1990, you can see, are kind of yellow pretty much nationally. So that's kind of between 20 and 25%. Now the interesting thing, in 1990, according to IRSA, which is the International Health and Racket and Sports Association, there was 9,000 fitness facilities in the United States of America. Now the interesting thing, in 2016, when there's 35,610, I believe, or 510 fitness facilities in the United States of America. You can see that hypertension now nationally is between 25 and 35%. That's getting a little bit scary. Now, in order to combat hypertension, what the US government did was they created a new category of hypertension. So I believe it was 2018. I will have to go back and check my notes for the specific date and time. But what they did was they created a new category of hypertension. So instead of hypertension, you now have type 1 and type 2 hypertension. Because they recognized what they're doing is failing. So they wanted to get a jump on individuals with hypertension. And to sort of say, hey, you're getting close to having a really kind of screwed up circulatory system. So because of that change in hypertension, because you have type 1 and type 2, now in the United States of America, there is over 160 million people with hypertension. That is one country. So here's the stamp of approval for the entire country of the United States of America. 50% of you are hypertensive. That means it's 1 in 2. It is no longer 1 in 4 males. It's no longer 1 in 5 females. It's scary. And the heart of America is broken. And if you live in a different country, don't sit there and smirk. Because 2/3 of individuals globally who suffer from hypertension live in low and middle income countries. So America's the good one at 50%. That to me is a tragedy, that we have failed humanity. And now, I don't want to be the naysayer. I don't want to beat you guys down and say, hey, there's no hope. There is hope. There's a lot of hope. And shockingly, it doesn't cost any money. That's right. With what we're going to discuss over the next couple minutes, we are going to discuss isometric-based exercise, which is simply contracting a muscle for a sustained period of time, either without moving or into an object with the goal of not moving. The results that Dr. Ronald Wiley uncovered in 1969, now it is 2021, we are almost 42, 43 years. On average, 800,000 people die in the United States of America due to hypertension-related conditions. Globally, it's 10 million people. So it can either be 40 million dead people we could have helped, or 400 million people this information could have helped since 1969, but it wasn't brought forth to the public. We still condition ourselves to think, because we're talking about the cardiovascular system, that the heart is important. It is important. There are just people living without it now. A friend of mine, a client of mine, lives with what's called a left ventricle assistive device. He's on a heart transplant waiting list. His blood is circulated outside of his body by an apparatus. He doesn't have a functioning heart. And that's why I say that the heart is important. but is no longer necessarily essential for living, which is uniquely odd. And that still challenges my beliefs, and I'm okay to admit that. But we're helping him with the information that we're giving. Another client of mine started with me May 29th. Today's date is, I believe, July 20th. His heart function, so he was in a state of heart failure, was 18% when I met him. In a short period of time, his heart is now functioning at 60% with the information that I gave him. This information conflicts with the majority of information he has ever read and what his doctors were telling him to do. But because this information is not my opinion, because this is sound scientific data, that I flipped to him to flip to his doctor so they could read it. So the next couple minutes, we're just going to start to explore the science around isometric training and its effects on hypertension. These are not my words, but based on this information, I've been able to help a lot of people get off their medication for hypertension. Yes, exactly. That is exactly what I said. Get off their medication with doctor approval. I'm not saying go start Isometrics and stop doing your medication. Let me be very, very clear on that. These are all individuals that were working with their medical doctors and advocating for themselves to say, hey, I'm doing something new. Here's the research associated with isometric training and lowering blood pressure. So, one of the things that I want to bring up, it doesn't matter the age you start. We're going to talk about a study that looked at young adults and adolescents. They were inscribed to the Army at the age of 18. It's a longitudinal study. What they found was one of the conflicting factors in lowering blood pressure was poor isometric strength. So let's pull that up. So I don't butcher it, because I want you guys to know that this is not made up. So this study suggests that greater isometric muscle strength in youth is associated with lower levels of cardiovascular risk factors in young adulthood, independent of fitness, adiposity, so that's your fat size, and other confounding factors. That is the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and that's in 2013. So what they looked at was over 1 million people over a longitudinal study. So they found that at the age of 18, if you had higher levels of isometric strength, note it's not dynamic strength, it's isometric strength. And that's not to say that dynamic strength is not important, it just wasn't measured. So if I can look at that study and say, hey, maybe if I start doing isometrics at a younger age, and I can influence that number, maybe I can live a healthier life. Now, if we look at another study, and this study is from the Mayo Clinic, you know, one of the world's leading medical institutions in Rochester, Minnesota. They've been instrumental in moving medicine forward for, I don't know, easily 75 years. They're considered a world leader in most things medical. So this is from their preceding journal, and it was released in 2014. So isometric resistance training lowers systolic blood pressure. Remember, that's the top number. Diastolic blood pressure, that's the lower number. And mean atrial pressure, That's the pressure on your atrial tissues. The magnitude of this effect is larger than previously reported in dynamic aerobic or resistance training. That's interesting. So it's greater than, or in their case they say larger than. So if I can produce a greater benefit for lowering like individuals' blood pressure, why wouldn't nations be screaming that from the hilltop? Now, our data suggests that this form of training has the potential to produce significant and clinically meaningful blood pressure reductions and can serve as an adjunctive exercise modality. Interesting. Add it. We're not saying to take it away. That dynamic exercise. Now it gets kind of interesting, and we're going to explore that a little bit later. But I want to bring up, and we're going to bring up 10 studies today. And the reason we're going to bring up 10 studies is because I don't want you to think I just cherry-picked one or two. So bear with me. So let's bring this up. So let's talk about seniors all of a sudden. Seniors who are currently suffering from coronary artery disease. So a higher level of isometric quadricep strength was strongly associated with a lower risk of both all-cause and cardiovascular mortality in patients with coronary artery disease. Evaluations of quadricep isometric strength offered incremental prognostic information beyond pre-existing risk factors. So, what does that mean? Isometric muscle strength reduces the risk of dying due to cardiovascular and coronary artery disease. Cool. And it also gives you insight into something that you weren't looking at before. So measure your isometric strength. Figure out where you are. Check your blood pressure. Data is important. Knowing what's going inside your body and how it's functioning is important. And that came from the American Journal of Medicine. So not a crap, nobody cares about journal. It's the American Journal of Medicine. That's how important this information is. Let's check out another one. Oh, and this comes from Hypertension Research, and this is 2016. So isometric resistance training lowers systolic blood pressure, diastolic pressure, and mean atrial pressure. You know, you basically just heard that in a previous slide. The magnitude of this effect is larger in hypertensive males age greater than 45 degrees, or not 45 degrees, I'm in the biomechanics world too much, 45 years using unilateral arm isometric resistance training for 8 weeks. Our data suggests that this form of isometric training has the potential to produce significant and meaningful blood pressure reductions and could serve as an adjunctive form of exercise. Shockingly, stating very similar to what the Mayo Clinic reported. Now let's look at some more. Now, this is from Sports Medicine, and this goes back to 2014. Although the mechanisms responsible for these adaptations remain fully unclarified, it should read. Improvements in conduit and resistance vessel endothelium dependent dilation, how big your artery gets big or small, oxidative stress, and the autonomic regulation of heart rate and blood pressure have been reported. The clinical significance of isometric exercise training as a time-efficient and effective training modality to reduce BP warrants further study. That is incredible. So what they're saying is another group of people identified the efficiency and the effectiveness of isometric training. Their protocols, to let you know, are less than 10 minutes of time. It's not like you have to go walk on a treadmill for 30 minutes. It's not like you have to do that multiple times a week. Now, the interesting thing is, when I said that, I was actually right on 30 minutes, which is awesome. So let's look at another study. The effects of isometric or intensity of isometric leg training on vascularity or vasculature in trained and untrained individuals. Right? So this is the International Journal of Vascular Medicine. Once again, not a joke of an artery or an article. The results of this study show that training-induced reductions in resting blood pressure and concomitant vascular adaptations are dependent on isometric training intensity. The vascular adaptations comprised of increased resting femoral artery diameter. That means narrowed arteries got bigger. Narrowed arteries got bigger. Okay? That's pretty cool. Blood flow and blood velocity, and also vascular conduits. So what does that kind of mean? Well, if I can basically affect the artery, it's kind of like going from a one-lane highway where there's high stress, back issues or backflow issues, pressure increases and all this, and then I go to a four-lane highway. We've all driven a car. We know what that is like. It's like heaven on earth when you go from traffic to no traffic. Pressure goes down. Shockingly, blood pressure goes down in traffic and also when you do isometric exercise. Now, we're almost done walking you through this, but we got like 3 more. Now, this is the Journal of the American Heart Association, and this is in 2013, and this is a systematic meta-analysis of all the information out there. And if I'm kind of going like, how much more do I need to show you before you think about adding isometric strength training to the conversation for lowering blood pressure on a global scale? Well, we have a couple more. So anyways, endurance, dynamic resistance, and isometric resistance training lowers systolic and diastolic blood pressure, whereas combined training only lowers, diastolic blood pressure. Doesn't have a real effect on systolic blood pressure. That's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that later. So data from a small number of isometric resistance training studies suggest that this form of training has the potential for the largest reduction of systolic blood pressure. So here's an interesting thing. So this is a diagram from that article. If I look down at that bottom, you see that sort of rowboat rowing to the left in front of everyone else? So we're coming up to the Olympics. So if this is a race and your goal is to get far to the left, the team Isometrics at the bottom crush, not just beat, they absolutely crush their competition. So much so that their competition kinda gets upset when you say that they didn't do good enough. It takes less time, it takes less effort, and it yields a much greater result. So who can benefit from that? Everyone with hypertension. That's who. 1.13 billion people can benefit from doing this method of exercise. Now let's look at diastolic numbers. Well, it's a little bit closer. But when you're looking at the benefits, it's still Team Isometrics that wins. I'm also for participation. Participation matters. But I also like hanging out with a winning team. Now, the reason I get so fired up about this is because I lived with hypertension for 14 years. I struggled with chest pain, random like, oh, that hurts, or to the point where when I was exercising and doing cardiovascular conditioning, my blood pressure would normalize because my blood pressure would elevate to the point that I would pass out and be found on the ground. So I was a little bit pissed. But for me, Sherry McGowan, who reported in 2007, so I was born in 1973, so we're going back literally 14 years now, for when I stumbled onto this research. I went to school for a 3-year program. It was actually a 2-year program. I made it a 3-year program because I thought it was very important. I really do the first year. Build those fundamentals, they said. Then I studied under the world's foremost expert on exercise mechanics. Then I did a designation in a form of therapy that looked at the restoration of muscle contractility. And at no point in time, when I became the 21st person in the world with my designations, had I ever heard that Isometrics was good for blood pressure. Because nobody's talking about it. So Sherry was the one that transformed my life, because both of my grandparents died due to massive heart attacks. My grandfather at the age of 45, my grandmother at 68, leaving my mom at the age of 31, if I do the math quickly in my head, without a parent. That to me is devastating, because there's a lot of people out there who are going through that loss, and this information can help them. So let's continue. Let's go down to the next exercise. And this is from the physiological report. A single isometric exercise training session, not 23, a single isometric exercise training session was associated with significant, not insignificant, not only a little bit, significant changes in cardiac remodeling, function, and left ventricle mechanics in a population with pre-hypertension. The acute cardiac response may seen may be clinically important to help further understand the mechanisms inducing blood pressure reduction and improving cardiovascular health following isometric exercise. So in one session, there is significant improvement and changes in the remodeling of your left ventricle. Remember my gentleman earlier who we talked about with poor heart function, living in a state of heart failure. Your left ventricle is hugely important for the circulation of your blood throughout your system. So much so that my other gentleman, a living, breathing, walking zombie, who is clinically dead in a coma and requires a heart transplant because his heart doesn't work, has what's called a left ventricle assistive device. That's how important it is. So let's jump to the next one. And we're going to skim through this one just because I know you guys are barely hanging on to this. And we got to show you some cool stuff. So the meta-analysis suggests that a simple program of isometric exercise less than 20 minutes undertaken 3 times a week with weekly exercise times less than an hour can reduce systolic blood pressure by 10 millimeters of mercury and a diastolic blood pressure by 7 millimeters of mercury in less than 10 weeks. That's pretty cool. You don't see those numbers in dynamic exercise conditioning ever. Now here's where it gets pretty cool. They actually support that statement. So these are very substantial reductions, comparable with those achieved with a single pharmaceutical agent, and substantially more than 3 millimeters of mercury or so reduction resulting from regular dynamic exercise or from resistance training exercise. So that's not me making this stuff up. That's not me being biased, which I get accused of all the time. For those people that accuse me of, I have a message for you. Please, please, please contact me. I will be more than happy to send you the information so you can help your clients improve their cardiovascular system so they don't unnecessarily die. Now the cool thing is, that was our last slide. So that's all the science I'm going to show you. Trust me when I say I have a whole bunch more. But let's explore this stuff for a bit. So, isometric muscle contractions, basically that's the natural tone of your muscle tissue. Now, I understand that your heart is really important and it needs to beat in order to circulate blood throughout your body. That's one variable when looking at the circulatory system. One variable. You also have to worry about how it goes through what's called your atrial system. Very important. I'm not here to say it's not. And what one of the slides said, or one of the studies, well, isometrics helps improve the diameter of your atrial tissue. Now that's pretty cool. That was that part where I talked about a 1-lane highway to a 4-lane highway. Now, one thing I need you to understand, the atrial system is important, but it represents 35% of your circulatory system. It is not the bigger player to the game. Your venous system, how the blood gets back to the heart, is 65% of the equation. And your venous return system is controlled via your muscular system. Your heart basically functions to service your body's muscular system demand for more oxygen and the removal of carbon dioxide. The muscular system, what it does, it pumps the blood back. When looking at studies related to neurology and the function of muscle tissue, isometric muscle contractions increase the firing rate of muscle tissue by 16% more than concentric and eccentric muscle training. That means you're going to get an instantaneous response and bump with isometrics that you're not going to get with dynamic conditioning. Now it gets kind of interesting when you start to explore that a little bit further. So if I can increase the isometric tone of my muscle, so this has a mass. So if that muscle is not working and it doesn't have that ability to sustain an isometric endurance-based contraction, you're going to get microscopic distraction, a pulling apart, a narrowing of artery, a narrowing of vein of both your atrial and your venous system. It's instantaneous. That means you're going to have an instantaneous alteration of your blood flow. So if I am traditionally talking about the function or the narrowing of an artery, I instantly only assume we're talking about a plaque buildup inside. We traditionally do not think or explore the fact that because a muscle's not doing its job, that's going to lead to a narrowing of the artery. It does, and the effects of isometric strength training is an instantaneous increase in the thickness of that tissue. So much so that it's 100% predictable. 100% predictable. It's not 99.9%. You're dealing with elastic structures. So if I take something that is elastic and it is on stretch, can you guys see how that narrowed? If I bring that back, it gets thicker. So if I pull that apart, let me line that up even better. If I pull that apart, it narrows. If I take that off, it thickens. That is how quickly isometric training works. And I'm going to throw that over there. And I'm sorry if you're offended by my tone. However, I'm tired of people dying unnecessarily. I'm tired of nations spending trillions of dollars unnecessarily for something that legitimately I can sit forward in a chair and press my arms back and do that for less than 8 minutes a day and resolve hypertension. That's how easy it is. You don't need a treadmill. You don't need to go for a walk. In most cases, you don't even need to change your diet. What you have to do is improve the return flow of blood in your body, making it more efficient so your heart doesn't have to go against a higher pressure gradient because it's running through narrowed arteries. 99.2%. That's the involvement of your muscular system in your venous return, if you include your diaphragm. We can change lives this week. So my blood pressure, which was measured at 150 over 100 when I was 19 years old, was bordering on traditionally 143 through 138. Over 94 through 99 was the traditional measure. In less than 2 weeks of including isometric exercise, I have never dealt with blood pressure issues again. That's my story. I would love to help that become your story. Thank you guys very much for joining me today. Zero Velocity. Peace out.